Hey guitar fanatics, what if something you've always been told is a great thing to practice is actually making your playing boring? You know, I've always heard that playing a really good guitar solo is similar to telling a great story. But try to imagine a story where nothing ever really happens. The characters, they're always happy, there are no conflicts, and everything is just fine. Well, it sounds awful, right? And that's because without conflict, there really is no story. And just like a story needs twists and turns to keep you on the edge of your seat, a guitar solo needs tension and resolution to keep your listeners engaged. I come across a lot of developing guitarists that are practicing what we call chord tone soloing. They're usually doing that by learning triads and seventh arpeggios, and I've done several videos on those things myself. But those notes are only part of the story. Today we're going to discuss the other notes, the notes that aren't part of the chords that we're playing over, and how those notes help us create tension and resolution, how tension and resolution in our licks keeps our listeners guessing and wanting more, and how that really ramps up the emotional content of our solos. This really is one of the most important skills you can develop as a guitarist. I know you want to get into it, so let's play some guitar. So to clarify this chord tone, non-chord tone thing, we need to take a look at the good old major scale. And first, the notes that we do use to make up chords. I think it's easiest to start with the C major scale because there aren't any sharps or flats. And let's look at the scale on one string. That makes it really easy to see how it's made up. It's more like looking at a piano keyboard. On the A string, we've got the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and our octave C. And we can also give those notes numerical identifiers. Let's call them the root, the second, the third, it's a major third in this case, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and it's a major seventh in this case, and our octave. It's also important to get familiar with the spaces or steps between each note. Each fret on the guitar we're going to call a half step. C is at the third fret, D is at the fifth fret. So that 2 fret space, we're going to call that a whole step. D to E, 2 frets, that's a whole step. E to F is only 1 fret, that's a half step. F to G is a whole step, G to A is a whole step, A to B is a whole step, and then B to C is another half step. Remember those 2 half steps because they're going to be important to what we do in a few minutes. Now, to have chord tones, we obviously need some chords. The simplest way to think about building chords is to start with a particular note, and let's start with a root note C. We're going to skip over the D and go to the third note that we come to, which is E. E is the third note from C, so we call that interval a third. It's also 4 frets from C, or 2 whole steps. And we call that interval specifically a major third. Now, if we go from E, skip over the F and land on G, then G is the third note we come to, so G is a third away from E. But it's only 3 frets from E, and we call that interval a minor third. G is also the 5th note away from our root note C. So that interval we'd call a 5th. So it's not real complicated math here. So if we start at a given note, stack a note a major third away on top of it, and then stack another note a minor third away from that middle note on top of that, we get a major triad. Another way to look at it is to identify the intervals. We've got our 1, our root, the starting note, our major third, and then the note a 5th away from our starting note. So once again, there's our major triad. It's made up of a 1, a major third, and a 5th. But if we start on D as our 1, the third note away from it is F. That's a minor third, or it's 3 frets away. And a note a third away from F is A, but that's a major third. So we have another triad, this one with the root, a minor third, and a 5th. So we have a minor triad. We can also have what we call diminished and augmented triads, but we're not going to worry with those today. Let's stick with major and minor for now and talk about soloing over major and minor chords with what we call chord tone soloing. The simplest explanation of it that I can give you is playing the notes of a chord while the song that you're soloing over is on that chord. Let's make up a simple progression in the key of C. How about C, E minor, F, and A minor? So the C triad is made up of the notes C, E, and G. Here's a shape we can play at frets 10, 9, and 8 of the D, G, and B strings. And we'll stay on those strings for this example. E minor has the notes E, G, and B, and we can find those notes at fret 14, 12, and 12. F has the notes F, A, and C, and we'll use the notes at frets 15, 14, and 13. Lastly, A minor has the notes A, C, and E, and we'll find those notes at 19, 17, and 17. Playing those notes over those chords is great because the notes you're playing are always going to be right. They match up to the chords perfectly. But they're also going to sound boring. Check this out. I'm going to play over a little backing track of this progression. I'm going to use those little arpeggios, and I'll even flip around the order that they play those notes in. So the notes, they're correct, they're nice, but they're boring. Those notes are like the story I mentioned in the intro where there's no conflict. Imagine this story. Bill and Mary are high school sweethearts. They always get good grades. They never argue. They go off to college. They get good jobs when they get out, and they get married. They have two perfect kids that never get sick and never act up. And they're all perfectly happy forever. Well, that's a terrible story, right? And chord tones are like the Bill and Mary of music. Imagine this though. Mary gets kidnapped when they're in college. Bill, he's heartbroken, so he joins the military. He's shipped off to war. He gets wounded and he nearly dies. It's only Mary's memories that actually keep him alive. He returns home. He's a lost and broken man. But one day he wanders into a little coffee shop and there's Mary. Now, Mary had immediately escaped from her kidnapper, but he'd hit her in the head and she's got amnesia, so she couldn't find Bill. But when she sees Bill in that coffee shop, all of her memories come flooding back. She still loves him in spite of his battle scars, and although life isn't easy going forward, they work hard, they get through it together, and they ultimately triumph. Now we've got a story. And to make the musical equivalent of this better Bill and Mary story, we need to use the notes that aren't in the chords. See, these non-chord tones, as we call them, are what we call dissonant. They create a little tension whenever we hear them played over a particular chord. And when we return to a chord tone, which we call consonant, we resolve that tension. In tension and resolution, we get emotional ups and downs in our music. When things went bad for Bill and Mary, we were on the edge of our seats, right? But when they find each other again, we could relax. That's what we want to have happen when people hear our guitar solos. Let's dive into some ways to make that happen. Our first exercise is this, and I love exercises that are almost like games but really teach you something. Over a C chord, remember the chord tones are C, E, and G. We're going to play on one string at a time, and we're going to play the four non-chord tones ascending, and then the three chord tones descending. If we go to the G string, for instance, the non-chord tones would be D, F, A, and B. And then we can come back down, C, G, E, and then C. We could do the same thing on the B string with D, F, A, B, C, G, E, and C. And we would want to do this exercise on all the other strings also. This is really going to solidify your fretboard knowledge, but just as importantly, it's going to get the sound of tension and resolution notes in your ear. Let me play a little bit over a static C chord. I'll first play just the chord tones for a couple of measures. You're going to hear how while the notes are correct, your ear, it's going to be begging for some tension notes. Here we go. Now, to my ears, that series of non-chord notes, well, it sounds like questions. There's something that's longing and unfinished about the sound of those notes over that chord. Then our chord tones, to me, they sound like answers. Now, speaking in terms of intervals, we said the triads are a starting note or a 1, and then notes a 3rd and 5th above that. The first non-chord tone is the 2nd, or D. And if I play that D over just a C root, it's not particularly tense, but it definitely sounds unfinished, like it's just hanging there. Our ears are going to pull that note either back to the root or up to the 3rd. And I definitely feel a sense of relief when it resolves. The 4th, or F, now, here's one of our half steps to remember. It really sounds unfinished over the root and pulls even harder to the 3rd because the two notes are so close together. So if I'm playing a C chord and we replace the 3rd with either the 2nd or the 4th, we call that new chord suspended. And that's a songwriting trick that you've heard a million times. And we can get that same effect with our lead lines. Now the 6th, or A over a C, it's sort of a happy sounding interval, but to me it still feels like we're asking a question. Sort of like greeting with old friend with, hey, how are you? And the friend resolves by saying to the 5th, and the answer is, I'm great and I'm happy to see you. And then we have the major 7th, or B. That's our other half step, and it's going to be pulling hard towards the root. So that B note against a C, to me, it sounds either kind of dreamy or sometimes it sounds bittersweet, like longing for something from the past that's gone forever. Now, you'll have to decide for yourself how each of these notes make you feel, but here's the whole ball of wax. If these notes are making you feel something, they're going to make your listeners feel something. And the better that you get at creating this tension and resolution, the more you're going to hear your listeners say things like, wow, this person's playing is so emotional. They can say so much with just one note. Check out how easily we can create some great sounding short phrases. I'm going to play 4 notes each time. Let's start with the major 7th to the root, so that would be B to C, and then the 6th to the 5th, which would be A to G. I'm at frets 12, 13, 10, and 8, all on the B string. And we could make it sound like this with a little phrasing. And compare how dull a C triad arpeggio sounds by comparison. Now let's play the 4th, the 5th, the 4th, and the major 3rd. And that would be F, G, F, and E at frets 6, 8, 6, and 5 of the B string. That also sounds great, and that resolution to the 3rd after hanging on that 4th again is really strong because of the half step. Lastly, we could play the second, so we would have D, the third, the second again, and then our root C, so I'm at frets 15, 17, 15, and 13 of the B string. And that sounds really nice. In each of those little 4-note phrases, we created tension and resolution twice. Now that's how you tell a story with your playing, and that's how you keep people wanting to hear you play. Let's try another practice exercise, and this one I adapted from something that I heard Joe Satriani say about his songwriting process. And whether or not you like his playing, the guy has sold more records than any other instrumental guitarist for a reason. And that's because his songs have melodies that connect with people. Joe said he thinks most people give away the story by playing chord tones too soon. And he tries to create melodies by playing non-chord tones for as long as he can before resolving. What we're going to do here, we're going to go back to our little progression of C, E minor, F, and A minor. And for each chord, we're going to first play 2 non-chord tones, and then we're going to play 2 chord tones. Over C, for instance, we could play F and A, and then resolve with E and C. Now, E minor has the notes E, G, and B. We could play A and C, and then the notes B and E. How about F major? Well, F major has the notes F, A, and C. How about playing B and G, followed by C and F? Now, A minor has the notes A, C, and E. And we could play the notes B and D, followed by C and A. And here's how each of those combinations sound over our little backing track. So I added a little bit of phrasing there, but I kept it pretty academic because thinking about playing over chords like this, it might be new to you. The next step here is to take these little 4-note combinations and really add some good phrasing, make these things sing and speak to people. So over C, we had the notes F, A, E, and C. So what if we add phrasing? We could downslide into the F, bend the G up to A, release that back down to F, slide into the E, and then bend B at the 12th fret of the B string up into C and give it some vibrato. And that's how you turn an academic exercise into music. For E minor, we were playing A and C, and then B and E. And we could phrase that all on one string and make it sound like something that Andy Timmons or Chris Buck might play. For F, we're using B and G, and then C and F. We're going to go way up on the E string, and we're going to play B and G at frets 19 and 15. We're going to hit that B again and really draw out a half-step bend to C and release it back to B before our big resolution to our F note. That, to me, is a really powerful little lick, and it's just dripping with emotion. A minor, we're using B, D, C, and A. And what if we play the B at the 12th fret of the B string, bend C up to the D? We're going to slowly release it down to C, re-articulate that C when it gets back to pitch, and then really nail that A note. Each of those phrases sound really powerful and emotional. Let me play all 4 of those over the backing track. Now it's up to you to take these concepts and expand on them. Experiment with this stuff over different chord progressions, come up with dozens of your own licks. This ability to really use the different intervals, the mixing of chord tones and non-chord tones, it really is one of the most important skills you can develop if you want your playing to resonate with people. To me, it's what it really means when I say that you don't always have to play a lot of notes, you just have to play the right notes. You should come over and check out my Patreon page where we're going to get deeper into this and all of the things that we discuss on YouTube. In the meantime, here's another video that will really help you with some different ideas for playing through chord changes. Have fun with your guitar playing. I'll see you soon.